There's no doubt that the feminist movement has had major impacts on the lives of women. But what about men? How has it affected them? Our next guest addressed that topic during a recent presentation for the John Locke Foundation's Shaftesbury Society. Mona Charen is Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She's also the most recent Pope Lecture speaker at North Carolina State University. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I'm guessing most people, when they think about the feminist movement and the impact that it's had, think about women.
Exactly.
Why should we also be thinking about how this has affected men?
It's a huge untold story. We have a culture and a society that is very focused on the needs of women, often in very good ways. Women have special needs at work. Women have to deal with sexual harassment. Women have challenges of various kinds with juggling home and family plus work. All right, that's fine. But what we don't tend to pay much attention to is that men in our society are falling behind in worrisome ways. We have now a situation where 60% of the undergraduate bachelor's degrees that are awarded go to women. A similar number of graduate degrees in many fields. Women are graduating from high school at higher rates than men. Women are employed at higher rates than men. Men are also falling away from their family responsibilities and from fatherhood. And what I'm worried about, and what I think our culture needs to grapple with and pay attention to, is that the decline of men as fathers and the decline of appreciating that very important role in their lives and in our society has had many very baleful effects. It's had bad effects on women. Girls who grow up without fathers in the home have many more problems than girls who have involved dads. But what we've found recently, what the social science tells us, and what some of those data that I was just citing suggest, is that growing up in a fatherless home is much more devastating for boys. And they are paying a much heavier price in terms of life success. So boys who grow up without dads, we all know that they're much more likely to get involved with the criminal justice system. That's a well-known statistic. But it's also true that they're less ambitious, less likely to want to go to college, and less likely to be employed as adults than their sisters who grew up in the same home without a father. And so we need to be particularly attentive to the fact that boys need dads in order to grow up healthy and happy and, frankly, marriageable. When guys grow up without fathers, they are much less likely to be the kind of men that women want to marry. And so that's another aspect of this. It's sort of, we're all connected. You know, there's so much of a tendency to say what's good for women versus what's good for men. And what I try to say in my talk, what I said in my talk, what I say in my book, Sex Matters, is that we cannot bifurcate what's good for the sexes that way. We're too connected. Men and if women are thriving at the expense of men, or if men are failing to thrive, it affects women and vice versa. So,
we are chatting with Mona Charen. She is Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Do these harmful effects for men, do you think, result from the feminist movement, or is this just something that has happened because of such a focus on women that men have gotten left behind?
That's a very, very complicated question. I think to a degree, especially the early second wave feminists that are sort of the iconic, Betty Friedan and Gloria Steinem and Germaine Greer and so forth, that crowd certainly contributed to this problem because they weren't content to talk about women's advancement. They also denigrated men and they denigrated marriage. They felt that marriage was a trap for women, and they were very, very keen to destroy what they called the patriarchy. And by that, they meant not just that men tend to have the corner offices, but that marriage itself was a kind of oppression of women. And I think that as a matter of intellectual history, that did affect the culture. It did serve to devalue marriage and diminish its importance for many people. Obviously, there are other things going on as well. The economy is changing to less of an industrial economy. We're now in a post-industrial or information age economy. The kinds of jobs that our economy now tends to provide tend to be service-oriented jobs where women might have a slight advantage because women are more interpersonally sophisticated, shall we say, than men. And in general, not always, but these things are roughly true. And so those things are also contributing. But I do think that the feminist movement, insofar as it denigrated marriage and the importance of fathers in particular, played a role.
We could talk for a long time about what we do now that we know about the problem, but what do you see as sort of the first thing we need to recognize and address now that we know that this problem exists for men?
We need to focus on the fact that people in the upper third of our society, college educated and above, have figured out that marriage is important. They have a plan for their children, and they know that in order for their kids to take their places in the upper echelons of our society, that they need two parents and that they need fathers for the most part. Obviously, same-sex couples, that's not always going to be possible, but with the other two-thirds of our society, which is the vast majority of Americans, marriage has fallen so far out of favor that it is almost not the norm now. If you look at the numbers of high school dropout women, for example, who have their first baby out of wedlock, it's something like 67%. And it is no longer the norm for for people with little or only some college education. So what do we do about that? Well, one thing, and I'll quote Charles Murray here, Murray says that the elites need to preach what they practice because, don't keep it a secret that this is one of the ways that you can have a successful life and a middle-class income or above, and that your children are likely to thrive.
So a very important message. Do you get the sense that some people are now getting this, that the evidence is so obvious that people see there's a need to act?
I'm not so sure about that, but what I do think is that it very much matters how you frame it. You cannot come to people and chastise them and say, you're a bad person because you had a baby out of wedlock or you fathered children out of wedlock. They're following the social norms that they inherited. They didn't think they were doing anything particularly wrong. It's up to us to say, hey, you might want to rethink this. Here are the facts. Here's things that you might not have heard about. I mean, I quote a young woman from a inner city high school, beautiful young gal, smart, who was told, she said, I never was told about the success sequence. That is, that you should do these things in order and be sure to be married before your first child. She said, no one ever talked about that with us.